Good evening. The Thursday, September 26, 2019 regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission will now come to order. May I have roll call, please?
Commissioner Gomez?
Here.
Commissioner Gooding?
Here.
Commissioner Mackin?
Here.
Commissioner Sison?
Here.
The records show Commissioner Patel is absent.
Okay, adoption of the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt, please?
Make a motion that we adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Consent calendar. Is there anyone who would like to remove an item from the consent calendar? I see no one. May I have a motion to adopt the calendar, please?
So moved.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oral communications. Is there anyone who would like to address the Commission about an item that's not on tonight's agenda? I see no one. Moving to written communications. We have none. And we'll move to our next item on the agenda is the public hearing. And this concerns the General Plan Amendment GP-1-19, Baylands and Beatty General Plan Subareas and Bayshore Boulevard, C-1 Commercial Mixed Use, M-1 Manufacturing, HC-Heavy Commercial District. The purpose of the hearing is to make a recommendation to the City Council concerning amendments to Chapters 2, 5, 6, and 12 of the Brisbane General Plan by 1. Incorporating approved text and graphics from GP-1-1H, which is Measure JJ. 2. Revising the General Plan standards for roadway level of service for purposes of internal General Plan consistency. And 3. Updating factual information in the General Plan. And also to approve the addendum to the Baylands Final Program EIR. Staff, may we have the report?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. As we recall, General Plan Amendment GP-118 was approved by the City Council last July, and that was ratified by the voters through approval of Measure JJ in November. As part of that action, it was acknowledged by the Council that there would be a need to, or direction that the other amendments to the General Plan as needed to fully implement GP-118 would be required. And so what you have before you tonight, this General Plan amendment is intended to fulfill that requirement. And there are kind of three major components to it. One includes some factual updates to the current General Plan, at least in the chapters that we were proposing for amendment. Again, the General Plan was approved in '94. Some of the descriptions and narrative is somewhat outdated just by change in circumstances. So you'll see a series of amendments that relate to that. The second is to implement GP-118 and Measure JJ, because again, there are multiple references often to the same area in the other sections of the General Plan. So for purposes of internal consistency, and we need to change those revisions and make those revisions throughout the document. And then there's a discussion and a revision to the level of service standards for circulation and traffic. And you may recall we had some discussions of that in workshops earlier this year. And we'll get into all these in a little more detail. So again, just way of reminder, GP Measure JJ allowed the 1,800 to 2,200 dwelling units, the 6.5 million square feet, and an additional 500,000 square feet of hotel usage. It also allowed or merged the Northeast Bayshore subarea into the Baylands subarea and modified the boundary between the Baylands and Beatty subareas. So again, that's the graphics that went along with that previous amendment last year. It also established a number of policy directives to be implemented through further development in the Baylands. Relates to the preparation of a specific plan, certain requirements related to site remediation, obtaining and securing a reliable water supply, implementing sustainability features, and that certain economic needs in terms of city fiscal health be maintained, the project pay for itself, that amenities and whatnot be provided on a phased basis. Other provisions related to preserving habitat areas and roundhouse stabilization and restoration. And again, as I mentioned, there was this requirement, the further amendments to the general plan as may be needed to fully implement Measure JJ last year. So I'll just kind of briefly touch on some of the, in a broader way, some of the categories of amendment that we're proposing. Certainly if you have questions about specific wording and specific language, we'll entertain that at the close of the staff presentation. So again, I noted there are three sort of buckets that these amendments fall into, related to JJ, the level of service standards, and then sort of just factual updates. So some of the factual updates, some of the examples are just updating some of the other changes to land use that have occurred elsewhere throughout the city since the general plan was previously adopted in '94. Renumbering the general plan policies for consistency, some other non-substantive reformatting, and there's also some deletion of some comparative text between what happened in 1980 and 1994. There's also some references of alternatives that were considered in the preparation of the '94 plan that, especially in the context of the Baylands, become somewhat confusing if it's retained. So there are some revisions to the text to delete some of that historic language. Again, the '94 plan will always remain, there's a hard copy of it, so anybody who's interested in some of that historic context, that's always going to be available in the city's archives and records. It's not like that text is ever going to be lost. So I don't want anyone to think that deleting or modifying some of that text is removing it from the record completely. Again, sort of the incorporation of GP 118 or Measure JJ. We've modified some of the introduction section of the document. We've merged some of the Northeast Bayshore information that remains relevant. It's just been now absorbed into the Bayland sub-area. We don't have two separate sub-areas. And then there's a number of policies that are in the current general plan that were in a sense either superseded by what was adopted in Measure JJ, or the wording was slightly modified. So we took care in making sure that some of this pre-existing policy language was modified to basically ensure that the provisions of Measure JJ are essentially in controlling, and there are no inconsistent language elsewhere in the general plan that would be seen as either contrary or inconsistent. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Lloyd Zola, our city's consultant, and he will go through some of the level of service revisions that are proposed. Oh, I do have one sort of technical correction, though, I need to make on it's page 2-13 in attachment B1 of the staff report. On the third paragraph under Baylands, there's a typo that we need to correct. And this is related to the final sentence of that paragraph. It should read, a methane gas collection system is in place. The words installation or collection system were inadvertently deleted, so those words should be retained. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lloyd to walk through the level of service.
Hopefully I'm going to get the technology right. You've updated it since the last time I was here, and I think we went through 3 different planning commission meetings till I can actually get this right. The third type of amendment that is being proposed tonight is modifications to the general plan level of service standards. And this goes back to the original analysis of Baylands development that was done at the time of the Baylands hearing and the EIR. And what we found was that, you know how Bayshore Boulevard works today. If you take the development, all that development that's being proposed in San Francisco to the north, into Daly City, and what's going on Oyster Point and to the south and the rest of the peninsula, your level of service standards along Bayshore Boulevard will not be met in the future, even if you develop nothing. And so a level of service standard that established LOSC or LOSD, level of service C or D, along Bayshore Boulevard would not allow any project to be consistent with the general plan that ever had to do a traffic study. And the EIR recognized this, the general plan amendment and Measure JJ recognized this by saying that, and this is the mitigation measure, that the level of service standards need to be modified in recognition of current conditions. And one of the current conditions that we know is that 65, depending on time of day, 2/3 to 3/4 of the traffic along Bayshore Boulevard never stops in the city. It is regional through traffic. And we also know that what happens as you make improvements to Bayshore Boulevard, and this is one of the counterintuitive things about LOS sometimes, as you would improve intersections, they would not get any better. Because what will happen along Bayshore Boulevard is, because it's carrying 2/3 to 3/4 of its traffic as an alternative to the 101 freeway, the easier it is to drive on Bayshore, the more people get off the freeway. And so you would end up, the LOS standard would put the city on a treadmill. And what that treadmill would do effectively is make it easier and easier to travel across Brisbane and more difficult to do things that you all do every day, like make a left-hand turn onto Bayshore Boulevard or from Bayshore Boulevard. And so the direction from the EIR, from the original GP 118, was solve this problem. What we propose is, first of all, retaining the level of service standards everywhere other than Bayshore Boulevard, Geneva Avenue Extension, and the freeway interchanges. Those are the places that this regional traffic gets pushed onto. So what we would do, or what we're recommending, is that Bayshore Boulevard, the Geneva Avenue Extension, be called regional arterials to recognize their regional function, because that's what they're going to carry. We would then replace, along those regional arterials, Bayshore and the Geneva Extension, replace the level of service standard with actually preparing and implementing multimodal mobility plans for those roadways, looking at what can be done along Bayshore Boulevard, recognizing some of the grade differentials, recognizing businesses that are there, recognizing some of the uses fronting on Bayshore at the southern end of the city and needs to turn onto and from Bayshore Boulevard. How can we best get mobility within the city without creating traffic congestion? So the kinds of things that we might look at in doing a multimodal plan would be things like looking at where should traffic signals be. Perhaps looking at traffic signals at the southern end of the city, kind of bracketing the existing development that's down there. There's a lot of people trying to make that left-hand turn to go northbound so that people can move in and out, onto and from Bayshore. We would look at timing of signals. We would look at aligning streets and a lot of different things. Look at how we can make the bikeways safe, as even though there are bikeways, that street is awfully fast. And so one of the things would be, from the city traffic engineer said it would be really nice if we could just slow down traffic, have it move smoother rather than flying as fast as it goes up to a red light. And so we'll look at how we get smoother traffic flow, being able to carry more traffic, and not just fixing intersections. Then we would identify from that all of the physical improvements that would need to be made, could put a cost to them, and then require new development, such as the Baylands, such as any other development, to put improvements into this comprehensive program. The same way with an LOS standard, we would now ask them to put money in a fair share for individual intersections. So what we're saying is, rather than look at individual intersections, fix them in isolation from everything else, we would look at how does Bayshore function from one end of the city to the other, come up with a comprehensive plan, and require new development to pay into that plan. And looking at freeway interchanges, level of service at a freeway interchange, what you're really trying to make sure of at a freeway interchange is that traffic, one, getting off the freeway does not back up the off-ramp onto the main line. And sometimes with level of service D, if there's not, even with every level of service you have, if there's not enough stacking distance, you may have an acceptable level of service and yet create a safety hazard by allowing traffic to back up onto the main line. So we will look at a standard and are recommending a standard that says that intersection must function to look at not backing traffic up onto the main line, which is the major safety issue. And then as part of future environmental projects, environmental analyses, we can look at what are called, rather than LOS, merge-diverge movements. How does that traffic getting on the freeway merge with what's there, which is really the bigger issue rather than how does the intersection function. The policy that would be written is a modification to policy C1. And if we're going to have a multimodal plan for Bayshore or a multimodal plan for Geneva, what's important is to have what is the basis for that plan? What are the marching orders that we would give to the engineers and planners designing it? And this is those marching orders. Design the city's roadway system to emphasize mobility for Brisbane residents and businesses, accommodate bicycles and pedestrians, as well as vehicular movement, provide for comfortable and safe travel within the community to shopping, employment, recreation, as well as to transit and the ability to get to and from the 101 freeway. That would be, along with the multimodal plans, your basic standards for Bayshore, Geneva Extension, and the freeway interchanges, assuming that you recommend approval and council approves it. Am I at the, no, come on. Okay, John. I'm pushing the large button and it's not moving. I think they're doing this on purpose just to show me up in my technical ability. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, there we go. Okay. This is what we talked about before, the increases in regional traffic. So right now you've got 65 to 75% of your traffic on Bayshore and at the freeway interchanges from outside the city. These are the 6 intersections that are not going to work. And we've talked about these. These are the problems that we're trying to solve and what we would avoid. So you would actually have Bayshore Boulevard functioning as it can best function without just encouraging more traffic off the freeway. Ultimately, what you get, no matter how this works, is there's going to be some equilibrium between what happens on Bayshore, what happens on the freeway. And we kind of live in a world now where our phones tell us when to get off the freeway. And so we all do this. We drive on the freeway and it says get off the freeway because there's traffic up ahead, and in your case it says get off the 101, go take Bayshore. And so what we want to do is deal with that kind of balancing, and LOS just can't do that. So these are the things that we would be, problems that would be addressed. You're going to have to do the next one. Okay. The environmental for this, we are proposing an addendum to the Baylands Program EIR. We can go to the next. And an addendum is a specific type of environmental document. The addendum is identified under state law. Not yet. Okay, in sequence, basically says when you have, and you have certified an EIR, as this city has done for the General Plan Amendment GP 118, no subsequent EIR can be required unless certain things occur. One is a new significant impact will result, or previous impacts that were identified as significant and unavoidable are going to be substantially more severe because of changes in the project, substantial changes to the circumstances under which the project is being undertaken, or new information. So we can go to the next one. when none of those things occur, when there's no new significant impacts, the significant impacts are not going to be substantially more severe, an addendum is the appropriate document. And what the addendum effectively does is look at the existing general plan or the existing EIR and identify how well does that address the impacts. So the question is, how well are the impacts of this general plan amendment already addressed? When we look at the factual updates, those are simple factual updates. They have no environmental effect. All the issues related to putting GP 118 and the amendment that was adopted last year into the general plan are the same impacts that were already addressed in that EIR. This is kind of finishing the amendment that had been adopted. And then what you have in the addendum and those attached findings are relative to the revised level of service standards. And the basic finding there is that there are no new significant impacts. There are significant impacts related to Baylands development. Those were identified, and as a result of modifying the LOS standards, there's not going to be any new significant impacts, and the significant impacts we already know are going to occur will not be substantially more severe. And so that is the definition of why an addendum is proposed. So with that, we'd be glad to take any questions you might have.
Okay, any questions on this side? No? Mr. Mackin?
I think as we go along, we're going to probably bring you back for questions.
No problem. We'll be right over.
Okay, thank you.
Don't go away.
Okay. Does that conclude the presentation?
It concludes the staff report, and just a reminder, what we're doing is recommending that the commission approve case GP1-19, including the addendum, which was attached to your staff report. That, again, obviously is a recommendation to the council. They'd have take the final action on this.
Okay, so I think what we'll do now is we'll open up the public hearing. And first on the list is Paul Buscala.
Thank you, commissioners. So I had quite a few various comments on topics, but I think I'll just stick to this one. We're going to have other opportunities?
Oh, yes.
As things come up? Okay. It doesn't pertain to what Lloyd just discussed. It has to do with the acres,
okay.
the Brisbane acres. And if you go to the land map on G147, the Brisbane acres is listed as residential. And over 40 acres have been purchased. 2 of them are owned by the Brisbane Water Department, which would, in my mind, mean that would be necessary to build a water tank on the upper slopes of the Brisbane acres. And they're not listed as open space. And even if they were listed as open space doesn't provide protection for areas that are listed as open space unless they're conserved or preserved or protected open space. So I'm concerned about that. Open space, like I said, just means public property. That's all it means. There's no protections on it. So I'm curious as to why the Brisbane acres, the upper acres above central Brisbane in particular, are listed as residential. And if you read into the, it says open space designate properties that have been purchased, given, or offered for dedication to a public agency for open space use or conservation purposes. Well, conservation purposes mean if there was an existing use, like grazing or timber or something, that only that use could be continued. Something that you need to know about the Brisbane Acres is, while a good portion of them were purchased with matching funds from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the Coastal Conservancy, they have a provision when they do the matching funds that if you want to pay them back, they don't have a problem with you deciding to do something else at the discretion of, let's say, our city council. So I'm very concerned about that in this graphic it's listed as residential for the acres. And if you read on even a little deeper into some of the context of what's stated as to what needs to be done in the acres, they're talking about new roadways, adequate grading for firefighting. So I'm concerned about that. And, if we're amending the general plan and that map shows that these acres aren't protected and they're actually listed as residential, then that could be a southeast or southwest ridge, just like the northeast ridge. And that goes for the land in between on the northeast ridge as well. That's not protected open space. It just says open space. Well, it's green and it looks like it's protected. There's no protections. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Staff, can you address that?
Yes, currently the 94 general plan designates all the properties within the acres as shown. On this map, that particular area wasn't revised from the 94 plan. That's what it's always shown. He's correct. The number of properties within the upper acres have been purchased for open space, but the city did not amend the general plan on a parcel by parcel basis to change the designation. So they all lie within the acres land use designation as a general plan land use designation.
May I ask you, I'm looking on G 1.23, and the fourth paragraph down says Brisbane Acres lie within the jurisdiction of San Bruno Mountain Area Habitat Conservation Plan. The HCP specifies that if the Brisbane Acres are developed, at least 40% of the area must be conserved as endangered species habitat. So if we take your open space that was purchased and owned by the city of Brisbane, would that consist of 40% of the area? That would, it seems, solve the problem. No.
Yeah, I'm not sure what if the city wanted to, and the council wants to initiate a general plan amendment, again, you don't typically amend the general plan on a parcel by parcel basis. And each parcel in the city doesn't typically have its own separate general plan designation. So, if that was an issue that the city council wanted to cure by either text or map amendment, that's something that the council can initiate, but it's not. This was a factual update, and there was no update to that at all, period. It's no change to that map. That's what the 94 plan showed, and if someone wanted that to be changed, that would be something the council could initiate, and we could work through how to better either in description or graphically illustrate the conditions at the acres as they exist.
Changing. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I feel like we did touch on this topic a little bit within the last few months with regards to if a developer were to do anything in that area that is zoned residential, that they would be 100%, responsible for funding all said infrastructure for the city and so forth. And so, Paul, while your points around open space, and as a open space advocate, I see your angle on this. It seems that it is so cost prohibitive to develop that area that is why, even since 1994, it's been zoned for residential development, that it has not been developed. So that's 25 years ago, right? And we see all the development happening north and south of us. I guess I'm one of the younger folks in the room. I'm just going to acknowledge that. I'm just trying to think about what are we looking at? Are we concerned about development in 2035 or 2040, 2050? I'm just trying to like wrap my head around this a little bit.
If I may?
Yeah.
One thing that Mr. Buscal keeps mentioning, and I've heard him before speak at council meetings, is that the council, though they're calling this open space, could arbitrarily decide with recommendation from the city engineer, let's put a water tower up there. It's no longer open space. And I think that's been, am I correct, your issue all along is that open space has different definitions. We need a water tower, so we're going to put it there because we have some open space where we could put a water tower.
Okay.
And that was his concern, not necessarily development, but that the city could arbitrarily, the council could vote to do something with this instead of it going into perpetuity as preserved open space.
So is that something that, as planning commission, that we would, intervene, or should that be brought to council first?
I think all we're doing is making the recommendation, so they could still do what they want.
I'd just say that's not part of the proposed amendment.
Yeah.
And it's not in the scale of what's proposed for amendment, so no, you can't. I mean, if you want the council to initiate that or want to suggest that as a separate action, it's really not tied to this amendment that's before you today.
Yes.
Right, this seems to be something that's been in the general plan for 25 years, and the council has the right and the opportunity to make amendments to that as they see fit, but it doesn't seem to be within our current purview.
On the other hand, the council has changed council members over the last 25 years,
Of course.
so the priorities are different.
Sure.
So,
But council versus this commission is
Yes.
my point here.
but we could also easily just make a suggestion that they reconsider providing some specific detail to the residential areas and those that are preserved as open space.
I think that the staff is fully capable of speaking for themselves, but I sense that their issue is that there are probably a lot of issues peripheral to this current general plan amendment that we could talk about, depending on any member of the public's unique concern, that aren't about tonight's issue.
If I could interrupt for a brief moment, I'm the city's outside legal counsel, Tyson Sohagi. I think what John is getting at is that the item that's been agendized for tonight is specifically subject to amendments related to JJ.
Right.
Paul?
It was my understanding that this is to amend the general plan, not just JJ, and it was related to factual updates. And if the intention of the city was to use matching funds from the Coastal Conservancy and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to purchase acres to put them into open space, they were never put into protected open space. And this diagram indicates residential. It doesn't have the green like the other mapping does for open space. So I may be mistaken, but I thought this meeting was more than just Measure JJ or the Baylands. It was amendment of the general plan. So that's where my concern is and why my comments are directed towards the acres in particular. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, again, this is a factual update, and if the council, when they acquired properties in the acres, had directed that those parcels be, the general plan designation be changed on those individual parcels to open space, then that would be a factual update. The idea that what someone might have liked the council to have done when they did that, for us now to say, well, they meant to do that or they should have done that, that's in my mind not really a factual update of the information, especially mapping, because you are amending the general plan map in such a manner.
I see.
So
Commissioner Gooding?
what I'm hearing is that well, this gentleman's point may have tremendous merit on various issues. It's not an issue for this agenda tonight, perhaps better for the council itself.
That's correct.
And that's not our purview, is my point here. That's that particular issue. There's lots. I think commissioners here have many other questions and issues, but this one I think is not our particular purview tonight.
Commissioner Mackin?
Are you?
No, go ahead. I'll follow
We're
up
still in a public hearing, so are we closing the public?
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to follow up on this one subject. No? Okay. Okay. No more questions? Okay. Joshua Kim?
Hello. So kind of want to loosen up a little bit. And then my name is Joshua, and I'm from the International Youth Fellowship. It's a nonprofit international organization, 501c3. And this Saturday, September 28th, at 7 p.m. at the Cal Palace, we're going to be holding a world concert performed by the world-famous choir called the Gracias Choir. And this is actually open to the public, and we wanted to invite all of you.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Does this pertain to this general plan amendment?
Not pertaining to this general plan, but we do seek in help in actually helping the community with things like, multicultural, performances,
Okay.
expositions.
Yeah, what we're discussing now is the general plan amendment. If you'd like, usually at the beginning of our meetings, we invite the public to talk about anything they want. So that was the time to do it.
Wasn't that 7:30?
No, earlier when I invited members of the audience to come and speak to us about any issue, that was the time. But now we're on this issue. So unless you have want to comment about what we're doing now, perhaps another time, if you could come and, we can discuss things then.
Sure. Then can I do it after the meeting?
If you wanted to amend the agenda and have another second public comment period after the businesses, you can do that this evening.
Okay. So we will we can address what you would like to discuss after tonight's business here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to discuss, have a comment about this issue? Okay, I see no one. May I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, discussion. I think there's some confusion, I think, still, even I think from us, or at least from me, as to the breadth of what we're trying to do tonight. So in terms of the general plan amendment,
No.
okay.
Chairman.
So can this be revisited later, or this is it then?
Once you make a recommendation on this discrete general plan amendment, and that'll go to the council, and they'll adopt what they adopt, and then, again, the general plan is always subject to amendment. It's not like there's limitations in the number of times a year the general plan is amended. And the city eventually is looking at a more comprehensive update. I think once the Baylands is sort of put to bed one way or the other as a land use plan, because a lot of, as you're aware, and maybe some of the commissioners aren't aware, the city started a comprehensive general plan update in about 2005, I believe, a little after that. But essentially, with the Baylands not being filled in, it was really not a very productive effort to try to amend the general plan comprehensively with this giant sort of unknown as to what the development of the Baylands would be, because that drives so many other issues. So, it's always been the thought that once the Baylands gets resolved, then the general plan can be comprehensively updated. The fact that we're touching certain chapters here, just to bring the document into internal consistency and fully integrate Measure JJ, we took that as an opportunity to just correct. Essentially, you have a general plan that has a lot of 30-year-old factual information, and there's an opportunity. We felt an opportunity to update that and refresh that. I thought that's actually a benefit to everybody. But I mean, if that's something the commission's not interested in, anything that's designated as a factual update can be stricken if it's too complicated or it's making life difficult for everybody. This was something that we thought was a community benefit. The fact we're touching these chapters, we think it's an efficient way of doing it, but it's not required. And the ones that are related to JJ and the LOS standards are the absolute requirements that need to be achieved per the council's previous direction.
Commissioner Gooding.
Yeah, thank you. So as I understand it, there's sort of three prongs of what staff is suggesting or recommending tonight, and one is the factual updates to sort of catch up with 2019 reality, and I get that, and that's probably non-controversial unless someone has spotted something that's not factually accurate. I don't have any of those quibbles because I didn't drill that deep. The second is incorporating JJ into the general plan. Got that. The third one seems to me like different in kind, which is changing a metric that we've used or that you've used for planning purposes for quite some time from LOS to something else. And that seems to be outside the narrow scope of JJ, or at least JJ didn't address something as procedural or down in the weeds as that, and that's of a different level. And I'm not sure that that's something that I have a lot of information about why this new version is better. It seems to contemplate, and this is my particular view, I don't speak for the commission at all, I don't purport to, but it seems like it's kind of wishful in the sense that we would like to have a metric that incorporates bicycles and pedestrians and things, but it doesn't really provide for methods and actual ways to implement those things and create those things. It's this is how we would like the city to look like at some point down the road. Am I characterizing it fairly?
I think you have a couple sort of things that you put out there. Let's kind of try to tease them apart. And
yeah, please.
I think the first idea that sort of this is it is a little different than sort of the literal integration of Measure JJ. So literally, that's not quite the same as some of that other component. But I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind when JJ was approved and when the EIR was certified for that previous general plan amendment. One is it acknowledged that this level of service standard would not allow for any development of the Baylands, right? If you're a strict interpretation of this policy, this transportation circulation policy and standard, then you would allow for no land use development, right? So in a sense, the council has already determined what the land use is. So now you have a situation where the support of that land use, the transportation metrics, create a standard, so in a sense, a catch-22. This amount of development has been approved, but now you have a transportation standard that you cannot meet. And that was acknowledged, and that's what Lloyd pointed out, that mitigation measure, that needed to be reconciled and resolved. So there absolutely is a connection between JJ and what the council did with land use and this transportation metric. That's a very clear and distinct line between those two things. And your other point about, this is sort of maybe a little aspirational. In a lot of ways, that's kind of what the general plan is. And I think as Lloyd pointed out, you're providing sort of the roadmap. This is what our goal, this is what we're attempting to achieve. And then you have to go through a plan an actual develop what are those steps, and you're always testing it against what those objectives are that were set forth in the general plan policy. General plan policy, actually, you don't want it to get into providing literal solutions, because again, you end up with a 25-year plan. A 25-year-old solution, as we've found out, isn't always desirable. So the idea of building plans, literal solutions into the general plan is somewhat of a risky proposition, and frankly doesn't work all that well. So the idea of setting that policy objective, and then at whatever point in time that policy objective is going to be implemented through a plan or a program, that's really the heavy lifting. Is okay, this was the objective that the general plan set forth. Put the best technical solutions to achieve that objective and goal. And Lloyd can certainly elaborate on that if he wishes.
I have a couple of issues or questions, but I'll hold them because I know there are others on the panel with more detailed questions.
Did you have any comment, Commissioner Mackin?
Well, I have to echo a little bit of what Commissioner Gooding said, in that we're talking about a multimodal mobility plan, and we can hire a consultant and we can say this is our plan for Brisbane for all of the intersections and increasing pedestrian improvements, but somewhere in here it just sometimes starts seeming a little contradictory, because we're trying to move regional traffic and we're trying to make it safe and accommodating for pedestrians and bikes, and we know that you can't move intense regional traffic without making sure they're moving along at a good clip. And we don't want to widen the roadways, which makes it more accommodating for traffic to come off of 101 and use Bayshore. But I don't know if we're trying to slow the traffic down or speed it up. And the key here that really I think concerns me is that we can in a vacuum have our little plan, but the traffic bottlenecks are to our north and south. And so we say, here's what we're doing, by God, but without integration into neighboring communities or MTC, Caltrain, Caltrans with the highway, and Samtrans, all of those different agencies, and MTC, it's like standing out there and saying, I'm going to stop traffic and slow it down because, by God, we're Brisbane, and the car's just running you over. So I think, I don't know how to express it, but it's just, I'm going to echo what Commissioner Gooding says. It seems so idealistic and maybe not so realistic, because there's not, to me, enough mention of trying to fit this into more of a regional plan with our neighbors, because that's where the traffic's coming from. It's not being generated just within Brisbane.
Exactly, and the majority of traffic we have is generated outside of Brisbane. The issue with Bayshore Boulevard is you have three competing objectives. Mm-hmm. One is to move cars.
Quickly.
Not necessarily quickly. The issue is to move cars smoothly from one end of the city to the other. Quickly is not necessarily the answer. That's the whole concept that's become part of the lexicon of traffic engineers right now, of traffic calming. Because when cars are moving fast, they're farther apart, you move fewer cars. And so by slowing down sometimes traffic speeds, you can carry more cars on the same road. So what we want to do, so let's just lay out
May I ask you a question before you go on there? I was told once, and this may have been erroneous, that Bayshore used to be obviously a state highway. Our report says that it's decommissioned as a state highway. But I was told by an official person that Brisbane as a city does not have the ability to lower a speed limit on anything that was or is a state highway. Is that incorrect?
There are limitations on how you can go about setting speed limits. And the limitation, there's ways that you actually set speed limits. It's the percentile of how fast people actually drive. But so you couldn't arbitrarily say, we're simply going to call it 35 mile an hour speed limit. Or so what we're getting at is trying to figure out what is the optimal combination of moving cars, moving transit, and as you mentioned, the dealing with Samtrans, the bus companies, access to the Caltrain station, and there's a lot of other issues of getting people using transit. There are then issues, and you have right now general plan policies related to pedestrian movement, bicycle movement, which is the third objective. LOS works for one thing. LOS is there to maximize the amount of traffic moving through an intersection, vehicles. And as I'm staying overnight down in, I hate to admit it, South San Francisco, but I walked to dinner tonight, and I attempted to walk up Gateway across Oyster Point Boulevard.
Do you have scars from that?
No,
exercise?
but I have a total loss of patience trying to get from one side of the street to the other. Okay, that is the outcome of LOS-based traffic planning, because what is done there is the design is how many cars can we move through that intersection, and it works really well. That intersection moves a lot of cars through it. But the question that it raises also is that the appropriate way of going about designing Bayshore Boulevard to accommodate the traffic you see now is a fraction of what it's going to be in the future. And is that the way of doing it? Because right now what we know is if this city never develops one single thing again, 20 years from now, not your intersections along Bayshore Boulevard, intersections at the freeway interchanges are not going to meet your standards. And we also know that if you take the solution that you see of we're going to expand intersections over and over and over again, trying to meet an LOS standard, what you will accomplish is to reduce congestion on the freeway a little bit, but your intersections will continue to be overloaded.
So if you acknowledge that LOS is no longer a relevant way, and I understand that's what you're saying, and the state seems a policy now that they're proponents of this thinking. And so if you say, well, we have to do something else, and a multimodal mobility plan is the way now to approach this, I can take that as a premise. But I guess what I'm not seeing is that this should be in conjunction with adjacent cities and agencies as setting the table, so that it sounds so much in here like we're going to have this great plan for dealing with it. And it's really contingent on places like South City and Oyster Point being participants in public transit and freeway interchange lobbying and all of that. We can't do that as Little Brisbane all on our own.
Right. And that is, so we could create actually a policy related to, in a way, it's expanding the bi-county transportation study, which is focused right on the county line into dealing with some of the larger issues of that regional through traffic. And I think that makes a ton of sense, and that would be a good policy to add, is that kind of regional planning needs to occur. But here's the limitation with that. I'm trying to find a nice way of saying it, I'm not. San Francisco and the cities to the south do not care whether Brisbane residents can move through the city. What they do care about is how do we get people from north through your city and out. And realistically, If that means the people of Brisbane suffer, that local businesses suffer because your local mobility gets hurt, that's not their issue. What the idea of a multimodal mobility plan is you as a community get to decide what is right for you and what is the right balance of meeting those objectives for Bayshore Boulevard. How do we move the regional traffic through our community in a way that works for us and works for them? Because what you cannot do is simply create a bottleneck at each side and let it back up on both ends. That is not an option for you. So what is the right balance? And that's what we're aiming at.
And to your previous point about the idea of, this MTC, and there are a lot of other agencies in play that especially relate to the use of 101 in that corridor, there is a program that was proposed as part of this amendment to basically consult with Caltrans, MTC, SAM, CCAG, which is the County Transportation Agency, to basically work on the core problem here, right, is 101's capacity and 101's function, and trying to work toward a solution that hopefully will relieve some of the pressure on this of Bayshore as a bypass. So they're not going to be interested in Bayshore Boulevard, but so the idea of working at the root problem. And so we already do have a program language that I think acknowledges, and we acknowledge this is a regional issue, and it is going to take regional cooperation to make a significant difference.
I did note that was included, and I was glad to see that. I think this multimodal mobility plan sounds like a catchphrase, and I, since we can't regulate the speed, I'm hard pressed to imagine whether we're just humoring ourselves.
Yeah, we went around this from a technical basis we have a standard now. Your options, and some of the options on how to deal with it to reconcile the amount of development on the Baylands with a standard and meeting a standard, right? That is the conundrum that we have with the GP 118 and Measure JJ. There is an amount of development approved on the Baylands that cannot meet the roadway standard. And council said resolve it. We could change the LOS standard. The simplest way of solving this is one that will not work, is let's call the standard LOSF. We meet the standard, we're done. That doesn't improve anything for anybody. There is, ultimately, we went around with different LOS standards, different types of traffic metrics, trying to find something that would work. There is not a simple metric that will do that. So what we went to, and forget about what we call it, there needs to be a design, let's call it a design plan for the moment. A design plan for Bayshore Boulevard that runs from the northern city limits to the southern city limits, that maximizes mobility, moving vehicles, getting them through the community from outside to outside, from the north to the south, that also allows Brisbane residents and businesses mobility within their own community, ability to move onto and from Bayshore, and with the development of the Baylands across Bayshore, as well as does that moves those vehicles, moves those cars in a way that doesn't recreate what we all just laughed about at the intersection to the south, so that if you ever want to try and walk somewhere, you aren't going to do it. So we want to find what is the right balance and how do we design Bayshore for all of those. There is no single metric that allows us to do that. So what we try to do, and if the term multimodal plan is throwing you off, think of it as it's a roadway design plan. But it's a roadway design plan to move cars, people, and bicycles.
Well, if I may add one thing significant that I picked up in this, is that there was a suggestion of I don't remember if it was designated an arterial roadway that would connect Sierra Point to the Beatty Avenue interchange and actually keep traffic off of Bayshore. And that was significant.
Yes, and you'll see that most likely as part of the Baylands specific plan, but that would be essentially an extension of Sierra Point Parkway all the way up to Beatty and the new Candlestick interchange.
Because I think one other significant thing to keep conceptually here, and Commissioner Gomez, you're probably the best harbinger of reminding us that 10 to 20 years from now, we should not all be driving cars. But even without cars, you're going to have, look at Uber and Lyft, they've actually increased traffic. So even if we have public transit, that's going to have to go somewhere. And that's important. But I don't mean to belabor the point. I just, somehow that multimodal mobility plan just didn't.
I can make one more.
Yeah.
And then maybe this is sort of big picture pie in the sky, but what I'm hearing, I think, is that as a state, as a region, the LOS metric is not very useful because it doesn't encourage or facilitate other modes of transportation, bikes, transit, passengers, multi-passenger vehicles, self-driving vehicles, all that stuff. And that therefore, because that's a laudable goal, LOS may not be the right thing, but there's also a way in which I'm hearing that since we'll never meet the LOS, we're going to junk LOS. And I think the implementation of this multimodal mobility plan is going to be the key, because every specific plan that any developer needs to get past the council is going to have to meet the goals of this multimodal mobility plan, because there's nothing else to measure it by anymore, because we're junking LOS. Perhaps for good reasons, but I think, boy, it really puts the onus on the council and us in the future to make sure that we really pay attention to the other modes that are available and usable and can be implemented. Because obviously between Schlage, et cetera, to the north and South City exploding to the south, we're just trapped in the middle. And there's, I see this a little bit as an acknowledgement that we can't manage traffic by LOS standards anymore. It's just not going to work, which is, it may be true, and that's it's a change and it's different, and multimodal is going to have to going to be something that we seriously enforce in the future. So.
If I could make a recommendation, if you look at program C1B, which calls for in
where are you? Are you on a specific page?
G191. And while you're looking, LOS as a standard is one being taken out of CEQA starting July of next year, so it's not going to be in CEQA at all. Recommendations from the Office of Planning and Research are also ultimately taken out of general plans because it is so car-centric, and it also ends up with some counterintuitive solutions. What happens with LOS as you're looking at that is we tend to design individual intersections to react to as a reaction to development projects, as opposed to designing the roadway for what we want it to be, recognizing how much traffic is going to be moving. So the recommendation I would make is in program C1B is to word it this way: develop design plans for Bayshore Boulevard, the Geneva Avenue extension, and intersections along the 101 freeway, and then the way that this reads, that address the effects of regional through traffic within Brisbane, enhances mobility for Brisbane residents through a combination of roadway and intersection transit, bicycle, and pedestrian facility improvements. Those recognize the three objectives that you have as a community and would direct the city to come back, city staff to come back with plans. What does that physically look like on your roadways? And then you can, and with all the traffic analysis that you can get with that design plan, those design plans, and then say yes, that, or no, it is the right combination for us, it's not the right combination. How do we modify it as opposed to the way we're doing traffic planning now? Take a level of service standard, then its outcome is what we accept. So that's the suggestion. I think to get to your concern, we're focusing on the roadway design plan that meets those competing objectives.
So if I may, under your C1B, the item 1, it says whether changes in design speeds. What does that mean?
One of the things is depending on, and this will be one of the issues that you will actually more address, depending on how the Baylands is ultimately designed, is depending on fronting land uses. The actual design, the speeds that you would design the roadway for could change.
But if this is, it's alluding to Bayshore, and you said we can't arbitrarily change the speed, so that's where it's a bit confusing.
Yeah, you can't, how do we put this? You cannot arbitrarily say the speed is going to be X. Design speeds or the speed limits on a street are an outcome of fronting land uses, roadway design, spacing of intersections, actual travel. Yeah. And,
like
and
timing
how
of
people
lights.
actually use a roadway. So design speed is an outcome, not the policy itself.
Okay.
And that's all we're saying is we would look at, as part of designing the roadway, what are the effective things that might change design speeds? Are we better off with changes in intersection spacing that would slow traffic down, meaning more cars could get in the same space? Or would we be better with roadway designs that would move traffic faster through? And that, again, is not focusing on an LOS standard, allows the city the ability to look at those kinds of design issues.
And on the same page, you've got program C1D, pay established traffic impact fees. What happens to the traffic impact fees?
They go to those would go to the improvements that would be, we'd have a design plan for Bayshore Boulevard. There would be a plan to actually fund whatever improvements are needed.
Okay.
Doing a plan without having funding for those improvements just seemed like it wasn't going to go anywhere.
Do you have any more questions?
I do.
Okay.
Do you want me to roll?
Yeah,
I'll go fast. Category of roadways, regional routes. Is that nomenclature used anywhere by the state, MTC? Is that something we're inventing, or is that commonly used?
Not commonly. There are different cities use different terms. This term was actually taken, I can't remember, from a city, Orange County, where they've got these massive streets. They have a term, smart streets. So different, and smart streets are the more multimodal streets. So different agencies use different terminology. And you are not limited. You can use any terminology that fits. What we were trying to do here was distinguish. You have two roadways, Bayshore and that Geneva extension, have very different functions than other roadways. And because of their vastly different functions, we needed a different classification.
Okay. Maintain the current standard of LOSD at all other intersections along principal and minor arterials within Brisbane other than those along Bayshore Boulevard. What does that mean?
You right now have existing LOS standards that apply to all of your arterials, minor arterials, principal arterials, and so on. We wanted clear that those standards, the LOSD, will apply everywhere other than these regional arterials.
Okay.
So we are not changing LOS along anything other than Bayshore Boulevard and the Geneva extension.
Okay, so when we talk about the general plan land use diagram and a future extension of Geneva Avenue. Are we certain where that Geneva Avenue extension will be? Because it seems like there's a lot of moving parts. Or is that something just put it in, deal with it later?
No. We know on the west side where the Geneva intersection is going to be, because 3 legs are already there. And then the eastern, at the eastern edge, it is at the Candlestick interchange. What is moving and would be a function ultimately of design of the Baylands is how the design of the roadway getting from one to the other, getting from beginning to end. And that is just how far south would Geneva dip into the, as it moves east and west.
Okay. Let me see. So if we're dealing primarily with Measure JJ, and we've been provided in this attachment B all kinds of other things of which I found things in there I had questions on, are we to just ignore it? Or can I bring some of those up?
You mean amendment language?
Yes.
You should bring it all up tonight.
Okay. Page G 1.17. Third paragraph down. The sphere of influence, and there's been strike-throughs on determined by San Mateo County's local, the LAFCO is what we're talking about. Is there a reason why that was taken out? Is that no longer applicable? Because I thought that provided good clarity, and taking it out.
You can keep it in. It's fine.
I think it's good because it's not just a statement of this is our sphere of influence, but it validates it. On G 1.21, second from the last paragraph, look at the very last sentence. Enjoyment of the facilities on Sierra Point is enhanced by scenic views. Why not just say Sierra Point is enhanced by scenic views, blah, blah, blah. Because enjoyment is kind of editorializing. That's existing language.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then on the next page, G 1.22, last paragraph.
I'm sorry, what was that last one?
Oh, just...
No, I got the one about the enjoyment of the facilities on Sierra Point.
Right.
The next one you were...
Now I'm on the G 1.22. Very last paragraph. And it says, because of the shallow depth of the frontage of the lots fronting Bayshore Boulevard, access to the street and off-street parking are difficult to accommodate. And I read that and read it, and I go, well, I think I know what you're saying, but it's really not clear.
That is always kind of the slippery slope when you look at this document. And you see, that's not wording we're changing.
Right.
We made changes that we thought were useful and important. If the commission has other changes you want made, I'm perfectly happy to entertain those. Yeah, I mean, I understand it's not how I would have worded that.
Okay.
It is, and if you have suggestions or want to recommend changes, I'm glad to do that.
I don't even know if that's necessary. It just seems extraneous. Access to the street and off-street parking are difficult everywhere. Why even?
I would not disagree with you.
Yeah. Now I'm on G 1.24. Third paragraph from the bottom. It begins with, although residential areas. It says, although residential areas, particularly on the hillsides, are generally quiet. And I'm not sure I would leave that in there because the parabolic bowl of Brisbane and aircraft noise, it's not generally quiet. Just my take on it there. Next page, G 1.25, Crocker Park. Second sentence under there, it begins with, it was developed beginning in the 60s, designed by architect, blah, 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 blah. After United States, that comma, it seems to me that really should have been a period. It's a really long, strange sentence. Page G 1.28, second paragraph, last sentence. The remainder of the flooding has been attributed to inadequate capabilities of an old, heavily sedimented brick arch sewer under Bayshore Boulevard. Whose jurisdiction is that? Is that ours? And if not,
Yes, it's the city's.
it is ours. Okay. And maybe, well, I would just, since that left a question, I went, is that Daly City or is it San Francisco's? Because that's at a confluence of the three city lines. I think it would be nice if it clarified it's in jurisdiction of the City of Brisbane. Next page, G 1.29, under Baylands, first sentence, northeast of central Brisbane, easterly of, can we just say east of Bayshore Boulevard? And there's no mention in this that the northern portion is near the boundary of San Francisco and Brisbane. And I think that's relevant in describing the area, that should make mention of San Francisco being there. G 1.31, last paragraph. Activities that have been historically been allowed. You could delete the first been. Moving up on the same page, third paragraph, off-road, you should have had a hyphen in there. Nitpicky little detail, but if you're going to change things, do it now. G 1.35, number 4, Guadalupe Valley Quarry Surface Mining Permit Renewal. If we have a status on that permit renewal, do we have a status? I would like to maybe see a consideration that the status be put in there of the quarry permit renewal, which it somewhere else says that it's under advisement by San Mateo County.
The text that was tied to was deleted. That's why the
Okay.
was deleted.
Okay. G 1.40. Second to the last paragraph, near the very end, last sentence. The land had featured a number of substantial industrial structures, only a few of which remain, including the roundhouse. I'd take out which is, just say one of the few of its kind still standing, and designated, you could take out the is, and designated a historic resource. Just lots of extra words. Okay, page G 1.48. And this is a lot of nitty-gritty referencing measure JJ and GP 1-18. There is absolutely no reference to the roundhouse, and everything under that bottom paragraph, bottom two paragraphs, details all of the provisions in measure JJ, and to me it should include a reference to the roundhouse because it talks about all the development there. Then I'm on G 1.82. Under regional routes are roadways and highways that cross county boundaries and or carry large volumes of traffic to and from locations outside of Brisbane that does not have a destination with the city. And I just wondered that does, or that the volumes do not have a destination within the city. It's just a grammar. I'm not sure. It just sounded awkward.
We had a large debate.
Oh, you did? Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to bring it up.
It ultimately...
Volumes is plural and does is singular.
Ultimately, we decided that the does refers to traffic.
Okay.
Through traffic.
Traffic does. Okay. That's sufficient. G 1.87, top paragraph, Bayshore Boulevard. The second sentence, Bayshore Boulevard serves as the city's primary north-south transportation spine. I just almost stumbled on that. I get the visual, maybe just route or thoroughfare, the spine. Then the next red line text in the second paragraph, Bayshore Boulevard functions as a regional roadway through the city of Brisbane. Experience has shown. This might be just, you could just say, I'm going, whose experience? Who are we talking about as the authority? How about we say observations or study? But I have maybe a better solution, is just eliminate all that beginning of experience has shown. Start the sentence with peak hour congestion along Highway 101. The congestion doesn't cause traffic. Well, it does, but it results in motorists diverting from the freeway. It's kind of personifying something that is not human. And then the last part of that sentence, as motorists attempt to avoid congested freeway traffic, is almost unnecessary. Just simply peak hour congestion results in motorists diverting from the freeway onto Bayshore Boulevard through the city of Brisbane, period. Same page, bottom paragraph, go up from the bottom, the third line starts with a new interchange for Geneva Avenue at Highway 101 would be constructed. Do we know if this is proposed, or would this be better served by saying has been proposed or considered rather than would be constructed? Seems like it's a done deal.
Yeah, what we could say is it is included in the bi-county transportation.
Oh, it is. Okay.
So that might be best, just to say that the interchange is included in that study.
Okay. Because would be seems a little open-ended, like it. G 1.90. Last two paragraphs. All of the verbiage about efforts by California Air Resources, then prioritizing the movement, and I understand this is the rationalization. I'm not sure if that's necessary. The paragraph above talks about greenhouse gases, reducing automobile travel. If you think that's still necessary to put in there, but I just went, it's almost like you're trying to justify it, and I don't think you need to. I think the paragraph above really suffices to say we're trying to reduce the amount of automobile travel. But that's up to you. That's just my take on it. Let me see. G 1.96, second paragraph. Brisbane's roadway infrastructure has largely already been built, with the notable exception of the Baylands. Should read that will require, not which. Just a grammar. That's it.
Okay, anybody else?
Well, there is one thing no one brought up, and I've just been listening, is this whole concept of changing the metrics around transportation is really around changing behavior of humans or encouraging certain behaviors over others, right? As noted, other intersections in other towns don't really help us get around on foot or get around on electric scooter or get around on bike. It would seem to me that conceptually some of the language in here with regards to the, going back to the program, the earlier comments around the programs and the idea of facilities that will facilitate more pedestrian movement, more bicycles. In my mind, those are footbridges and kind of separate structures and stuff. I may have missed that articulated in here, but that's what I would envision coming out of something like this, which I think is really hard for us to conceptualize, because where does that really exist? But if it existed as a main thoroughfare connecting the what is soon to be a gigantic city, San Francisco, and what is becoming very large as well, South San Francisco, if we have that sort of multifunctionality where more people can get on bikes and there's more foot walkability from the train station or from whatever mode is kind of getting you around, I envision a much more of a vibrant place, and I think that's what we're after. And so this is really exciting. I think it's hard to project how to envision something like that, because right now all we see is traffic congestion and the hustle and bustle, and so it's hard for us to kind of pull ourselves out and look at it in such a way. But it seems to me like we're trying to create that framework to get us there.
You might want to take a look. I don't know if it was maybe 3 years ago or 2 years ago when there's again state law about this idea about complete streets, that streets have more purpose than just moving automobiles as fast as possible. There's a whole series of applicability design standards on page G196 that we weren't touching because these are relatively recent. I think they get to some of your core concerns. You want to look at some of those with a little more closer eye, possibly. So that was where we're trying to address the idea that there are competing needs, and we have to actually promote non-vehicular use of these precious public facilities for other people other than drivers.
Thank you for that.
One thing that I don't know that I saw in here, although it may have been somewhere, is traffic calming devices. And I've heard this brought up in many different city venues. And if you in fact have all those cars coming off the freeway and they're going 65 and 70, trust me, they are traffic calming devices, because just what Commissioner Gomez is saying, you do not want to walk along Bayshore. You don't want to try to cross some of those lights. You don't want to be on a bicycle. Some of it's very dangerous. So traffic calming, if we found an appropriate place to insert that, would be great. I do see it on G 1.97 at the top, such as traffic calming features and physical buffers between vehicular traffic and other users.
Well, I'm sorry. You want to add to that or change that?
Oh no, I think I just found it is in there.
Any more comments by anyone? No? Okay, then can I have a motion to approve case GP-1-19, including the supporting addendum by adoption of resolution GP-1-19 containing the required findings?
Just point of clarification is whatever motion that should include Commissioners Mackin's recommendations, if that's part of the motion by whomever the...
And I believe Lloyd had one modification to program C1B to replace multimodal mobility design.
Yeah. So policy C1, program C1A would, C1B would say develop design plans for Bayshore Boulevard, the Geneva extension, and interchanges, as opposed to multimodal plans.
That's good.
As well as John's correction for the methane gas collection system.
Yes, so the motion will include all those changes. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, before I move on, I just want to apologize to the young gentleman that was here earlier, Joshua Kim. Sorry for the confusion. I appreciate him coming up here, and I noticed that he has long left, but he stayed quite a while, and he left some materials for us. So I just wanted to apologize to him and invite him to come and speak to us anytime he wants. So thank you. Okay, next item is items initiated by staff.
I don't have anything this evening.
Okay, items initiated by the commission? None?
Madam Chair, I don't know if you want to report on the Bayland Subcommittee. Should we do that, or should that be a later date?
You can do that I would recommend you do it sooner than later. If you're like me, your memory will start to fade. But that's certainly you can use as part of the agenda for that, certainly, if you wish.
Yeah, we had a good meeting. When was that? That was
2 weeks ago on a Monday.
Yeah, and we're having another one next week. So it was very productive. It was our first meeting, and gosh, do you want to? Is there anything?
Well, a couple things that came out of it is number one, that UPC is holding various workshops, and I think that there's one more in October, and there was an emphasis to try to remind residents of Brisbane that anything presented there is a recommendation or an idea by the property owner. It does not mean that it is absolutely going to be the way it ends up. And
right.
The residents have had some ideas since the UPC workshops and have brought it back to the city. So the city is toying with the idea of possibly holding another workshop for residents to talk about their ideas or to formulate their ideas.
Yes, because UPC is holding another one October 17th, and we're meeting them beforehand to kind of discuss some of, I think, concerns raised by the community in their last workshop. So hopefully that'll be incorporated in the October 17th meeting. And then, like you said, we might have a separate workshop just, by the city rather than the developer. So just, and to invite people to get engaged. And again, these are, ideas that are being thrown out. Nothing is sealed in concrete. So, please come out and participate. Okay, so that's it for tonight. May I have a motion to adjourn until our next meeting of October 10, 2019?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.